My name is Aria Reynolds. I'm 24 years old, and if you looked at my life from the outside, you'd probably think everything is pretty normal. I have a stable freelance job, a small apartment, and a life that's not too bad. But there's something no one sees: the way my family has treated me for years. And everything truly came to a breaking point 6 months ago, when my mother made a decision I still can't fully believe. That SUV wasn't just a car. It was my 24th birthday gift from my grandmother, the only person in my family who ever made me feel truly seen. I still remember holding the keys, my hands shaking with surprise. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like someone's shadow. That car wasn't just transportation. It was validation. It was proof that I mattered, that I was worthy of something. And then it was gone in a single afternoon. My mom called me over to the house like it was any normal day. No warning, no discussion. When I arrived, my SUV wasn't in its usual spot. I asked about it and she answered casually, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. I gave it to Madison. She needs it more. Your single Uber is more convenient for you. I stood there unable to speak. Not because I agreed, but because I was stunned. No one asked me. No one thought I deserved a say. Everything had been decided for me, as if I didn't exist. As if I was just a backup option. Someone whose things could be taken without explanation. The most painful part wasn't losing the car, it was how easily it was taken. Calmly, logically, and without a trace of empathy. As if sacrificing my needs was expected. As if I was supposed to understand, to accept, to be flexible, just like they always said. And I didn't fight back. I didn't argue. I just stood there in silence, watching something that belonged to me disappear. But deep down, I knew one thing. If I stayed silent, this wouldn't be the last time. If I had to choose one word to describe my childhood, it would probably be invisible. My family wasn't loud or dramatic. From the outside, everything looked perfectly normal. My dad was an accountant. My mom stayed home for years before taking a part-time job, and we lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where people waved to each other every morning. No one would look at us and think something was wrong. But within that normalcy, I slowly learned that I wasn't the important one. My older sister Madison is 4 years older than me. She's almost identical to my mom: blonde hair, green eyes, the same laugh, the same way of talking. People used to say they looked like twins. I, on the other hand, was different. I took after my dad's side: quieter, more reserved, someone who observed more than participated. And from a young age, that difference seemed to place me on the outside. I remember the small moments, insignificant on their own, but overwhelming in repetition. If Madison wanted one of my toys, my mom would say, "Aria, share with your sister. You're more flexible." If we had to switch bedrooms, Madison always got the bigger one, because she has more friends over. If our schedules conflicted, mine was the one that got canceled without discussion. At the time, I didn't have the words to describe how it felt. I just knew I was the one who had to adjust, to understand, to step aside. Over time, I started to believe that this was my role in the family. The one who made things easier for everyone else. The word flexible, which my mom used so often, sounded positive on the surface. But to me, it meant something else entirely. It wasn't about maturity or kindness. It was a substitute for being overlooked. It meant that whenever there was a conflict, I would be the one expected to give in. Not because I was wrong, but because I was easier to manage. What made it worse was that no one in my family seemed to notice, or if they did, they didn't see it as a problem. To them, Madison simply needed more, and I was fine. Independent, low maintenance. Those words sounded like compliments, but in reality, they were excuses to ignore me. There were family dinners where I barely spoke at all, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew no one was really listening. The conversations always revolved around Madison, her work, her relationships, her future plans. I just sat there nodding, smiling when expected, like an audience member in my own family. And over time, that silence became a habit. I stopped trying to compete for attention. I stopped expecting fairness. I learned to make myself smaller to fit into the role that had been assigned to me. But what I didn't realize back then was this: every time I stayed silent, every time I stepped aside, I was teaching them that I would always accept it. By the time I turned 20, I was no longer the quiet little girl who accepted everything, at least on the surface. I began building a life of my own, separate from the family space, where I had always felt like an afterthought. I moved out, rented a small apartment, and started working as a freelance content writer. My job wasn't glamorous, but it was enough to support myself. I could pay rent, cover my bills, and most importantly, I wasn't dependent on my family anymore. To me, that was a huge step forward, but to my mother, it meant nothing. "When are you going to get a real job?" That was a question I heard at almost every family dinner. I tried to explain that my work was real, that I had clients, stable income, and actual responsibilities. But to my mother, if you didn't wear office clothes and work from 9 to 5, it didn't count as a career. It was just something temporary, something insignificant. Meanwhile, Madison was the perfect example. She got married at 24, just as my mother had always envisioned. A year later, she had a child, a small family, a stable life, everything fitting perfectly into the mold my mother considered success. Whenever she talked about Madison, her voice was filled with pride. "Madison has a family now. She has real responsibilities. What about you?" That question wasn't really a question. It was a quiet statement that I was lacking something, that my life wasn't valuable enough. There were moments when I wondered if I was doing something wrong, if choosing a different path, not marrying early, not following the traditional route, was the reason I was always overlooked. But eventually I realized the problem wasn't my choices. It was how they measured worth. In my mother's eyes, a woman's value was defined by whether she had a family, whether she had children, whether she fit societal expectations. And because I didn't meet those standards, I was always on the outside. I wasn't a failure. But in my own family, I was treated like an unfinished version of a person, a rough draft that never made it to publication. Over time, I stopped seeking validation from them. I focused on my work, my life, the things that gave me meaning. But no matter how much I built for myself, every time I went back home, everything reset. I was still the flexible one, still the one who could be compared, overlooked, and placed second without anyone questioning it. And maybe that's why, when the car was taken from me, I didn't react right away. If there was one person in my family who made me feel like I truly existed, it was my grandmother, Eleanor. Unlike my mother or my sister, she never spoke too much. She didn't interrupt conversations, didn't impose her opinions, and never tried to control everything. But she observed quietly, carefully, and so deeply that sometimes it felt like she could see right through me. After I moved out, I started calling her every Sunday. At first, they were short video calls, just checking in, talking about simple things. But over time, those conversations stretched into hours. We talked about everything, about my grandfather, about her garden, about the books she was reading. But what made it different was this: for the first time in my life, I felt like someone was truly listening to me, not waiting for their turn to speak, not preparing a response, but listening to understand. While Madison's visits with Grandma lasted maybe 30 minutes a month, I could spend an entire afternoon talking with her and still feel like it wasn't enough. One day, in the middle of a conversation, she said something that I didn't fully understand at the time. "You remind me a lot of your grandfather, Arya." I smiled, assuming it was just a casual compliment. But she shook her head. "Not in appearance," she said slowly. "In the way you see things. You notice what others overlook." I didn't know how to respond, because my whole life I had seen my tendency to observe instead of speak as a weakness, as proof that I wasn't strong enough to assert myself. But in her eyes, it had value. Over time, I began to realize something she knew. She knew every time my mother talked over me. She knew every time I was excluded from family decisions. She knew how Madison was always prioritized without question. And yet she didn't say anything. Not immediately. She didn't react. She didn't interfere. She watched. And she remembered. Sometimes during our calls, she would pause just a little longer than usual, like she was thinking about something deeper. Back then, I didn't pay attention. I assumed it was just silence. But later I understood. She wasn't just listening to me. She was preparing. Preparing for a moment when the truth needed to be spoken. Preparing for a time when I wouldn't have to stand up for myself alone. And the most surprising part was this: out of everyone in my family, the person I thought was the quietest, the least powerful, was actually the strongest. My 24th birthday was supposed to be just another ordinary day. I had already gotten used to expecting very little from my family. A card, maybe a simple dinner if my mom remembered. My expectations had dropped so low that there was almost nothing left to disappoint me. And maybe that's why, When my mom called a week before and said, "Come home this weekend, we have a little surprise for you," it felt strange. Her voice sounded different that day, warmer, almost caring. I almost didn't go. I considered making an excuse about work. But in the end, I showed up. When I arrived, the whole family was there. My dad, my mom, Madison, her husband, and the baby. There was a sense that something was about to happen. Then my mom led me outside, and there it was, a navy blue SUV, sitting in the driveway, with a giant red bow tied across the hood. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I just stood there staring, like if I blinked, it would disappear. "Happy birthday, Arya." My mom handed me the keys, smiling like she had just done the most generous thing in the world. "We thought you needed reliable transportation." I took the keys, my hands trembling slightly. I didn't know what to say. Madison had gotten her first car at 22 right after graduation. I was 24 and still taking buses and Ubers every day. I had gotten used to that imbalance, used to not being treated equally. But this time, it felt different. For the first time, I felt seen. Like all those years of being overlooked, ignored, had finally been acknowledged with something meaningful. I looked around and saw Grandma Eleanor standing near the garage, leaning slightly against the wall. When our eyes met, she smiled, but it wasn't just happiness. It was something deeper, something knowing, like she understood something I didn't yet. "Your grandmother wanted you to have this," my mom added, almost as an afterthought. She said, "It was time." I didn't think much of it then. I was too overwhelmed, too happy. For the next 10 months, that car became more than just transportation. It became part of my life. I drove it everywhere, work errands, meeting friends. I created memories without asking permission, without depending on anyone. That car made me feel independent, but more than that, it made me feel valuable. I started to believe that maybe things were changing, that maybe my family finally saw me, that I wasn't just the flexible one anymore. But I was wrong, because what I didn't realize at the time was that car wasn't just a gift, it was a test. Everything started to shift on a Sunday afternoon about 3 weeks before Grandma's 70th birthday. I drove to my parents' house like I usually did, not thinking much of it. But the moment I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. Madison's minivan was there, but my SUV, the car I had been driving for nearly a year, was sitting in the garage, in the spot that used to belong to my dad. I stood there for a moment, a quiet unease settling in my chest. When I walked inside, my mom was in the kitchen, completely calm. "Mom, why is my car here?" I asked. She didn't even turn around. "Oh, Madison borrowed it. Her car's in the shop." That was it. No discussion, no warning, just a decision that had already been made. I tried to stay calm. "For how long?" I asked. "Just a few days," she replied casually, like it was nothing. But those few days quickly turned into a week, then 2. No one mentioned returning the car. I texted Madison asking about her vehicle. Her reply came hours later, short and dismissive: "Mechanic needs more time. Thanks for understanding." No apology, no acknowledgement that this might affect me. That's when the irritation started to build. This wasn't borrowing anymore. This was taking. I called my mom. "When am I getting my car back?" I asked directly. This time her tone changed. "Arya, don't make this difficult. Madison has a child. She needs it more." I tightened my grip on the phone. "But it's my car." "It's just a car," she sighed. "You work from home. You can Uber. Why are you making such a big deal out of this, eh?" Big deal. I stood there in silence. No one had asked me. No one cared how I felt. Everything had been decided, based on one simple assumption that I would accept it. I called Madison right after. "I need to talk about the car," I said. A brief pause. "Mom said you didn't really need it right now," she replied, slightly annoyed. "No one asked me," I said. "That's not the point. It's mine." Madison exhaled, clearly impatient. "Arya, I have a kid. You don't understand. Daycare, doctor visits, everything. You work from home. You're more flexible." There it was again, flexible. It pulled me right back into the past, into every moment I had been expected to give in, simply because I was easier to manage. "Flexible doesn't mean I don't have rights," I said, my voice tightening. But the conversation ended quickly. Madison said Mom would sort it out at Grandma's birthday party, as if this was something that could wait. I stared at my phone, then at the Uber app I had gotten so used to using, and a realization settled in. If I stayed silent this time, then from now on everything I had would always be something that could be taken away. After my call with Madison, I sat in my apartment for a long time, staring at my phone, as if it might give me some kind of answer. But nothing came. No apology. No message. No sign that anyone in my family even realized this was wrong. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. This was normal to them. I was the one overreacting. That thought irritated me, but it also made things clearer than ever. For the first time, I saw it for what it really was. This wasn't just about the car. It was about how they had always treated me. And if I didn't speak up now, I would always be the one expected to sacrifice. In the days that followed, I barely spoke to anyone in my family. I kept up with my routine, tried to maintain some sense of normalcy, but my mind kept circling back to one question. What am I going to do? I didn't want to start a fight. I didn't want a dramatic confrontation. I just wanted respect. But it was becoming clear that if I wanted, that I would have to face them directly. Grandma's 70th birthday party was getting closer. Madison had said Mom would sort it out there, and I didn't like the way she said it, as if I wasn't the main person involved, as if I just had to show up and accept whatever decision was made. But this time I wasn't planning to stay quiet. I started rehearsing what I would say in my head. Not angry words, not accusations, just something calm, clear, and firm. I would tell my mom that the car was mine, that I hadn't agreed to give it away, and that I wanted it back. Nothing more, nothing less. A simple boundary, but for me, it was something I had never truly done before. Still, the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. Not because I was afraid to speak, but because I knew my mother. She didn't like being questioned, especially not in front of others. And if she had chosen to bring this up at the party, then chances were she already had her own version of the story prepared. That morning I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting a dress I rarely wore. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This wasn't just a party. This was the first time I was truly standing up for myself. What I didn't know was this: while I was preparing to tell the truth, my mother had already prepared to tell a lie. If you were in Arya's position, what would you do? Stay silent or speak up immediately? Comment "I would" and share your thoughts below. Grandma's 70th birthday arrived on a perfect autumn afternoon. Soft sunlight, calm air, everything feeling far too peaceful for what was about to unfold. The restaurant was more elegant than I expected: warm, golden lighting, white tablecloths, and nearly 40 relatives gathered. I arrived in an Uber. As I stepped out, I saw my SUV parked near the entrance now, with a baby on board sticker I had never bought. Madison and her husband were just getting out of it, acting like nothing was wrong. "You took an Uber?" she asked, casually. I forced a smile, but inside something was already boiling. I walked into the party with a heavy feeling in my chest, reminding myself to stay calm, to wait for the right moment to talk to my mom privately. Not here, not in front of everyone. But I had completely misjudged the situation. The first hour passed normally, people talking, laughing, sharing memories about Grandma. I barely spoke, sitting at the end of the table, observing like I always did. Then everything changed with one simple question. "Arya, where's the car I gave you, Grandma?" asked her voice, clear enough for everyone to hear. The room seemed to pause. Before I could even speak, my mother answered quickly, confidently. "Oh, Arya gave it to Madison. She knows her sister needs it more." She smiled proudly, looking around the table. "Arya is very understanding. She always puts family first." A wave of approval spread through the room. "That's so kind. What a great sister." I sat there frozen, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it. In that moment, my mother had rewritten reality. She had turned me into someone I wasn't, a version of me that didn't exist, someone who willingly gave everything away. I looked at Grandma. Her eyes were fixed on me. No smile, no reaction, just watching. Then she asked again, slowly, carefully, "Did you give it? Or was it taken?" The atmosphere shifted instantly. My mother's smile faltered. I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me. This was the moment I had prepared for, but still wasn't ready for. I swallowed hard. My heart raced. I could lie. I could nod and let everything pass like I always had before. But this time, I didn't. "No one asked me," I said, my voice slightly shaking but clear. "They said Madison would borrow it for a week, but it's been 3. The room fell silent. and I knew there was no going back now. Silence filled the room after I finished speaking. No clinking of silverware, no side conversations, just a heavy, suffocating tension. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but the only one that mattered was my grandmother's. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look angry. There was no disappointment in her expression, just a calm, controlled stillness, as if everything unfolding was exactly what she had expected all along. 3 weeks, she repeated evenly. Then she turned to my mother. Linda, would you like to explain? My mother let out a laugh, but it wasn't natural. It was forced, rushed. Mom, this is just a small family matter. Arya understands. She's always been flexible. Grandma didn't respond immediately. She set her fork down slowly, deliberately. I wasn't asking you, she said. I was asking Arya. And she has answered. The tension in the room deepened. My mother straightened, clearly losing patience. You're blowing this out of proportion. It's just a car. A few people at the table nodded slightly, as if they wanted to believe that was true. But Grandma didn't let it go. A car worth tens of thousands of dollars, given to a specific person, taken without consent, and you call that small? Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through every excuse. I saw my mother hesitate for the first time that evening, without an immediate response. Grandma continued, her eyes fixed on her. I remember our conversation last year very clearly. You came to me and said you wanted to do something special for Arya. You said you knew she often felt overlooked. The words hit the air like a shockwave. My chest tightened. My mother said nothing, no denial, no confirmation. You asked me for money from the family trust to buy that car, Grandma continued. And you promised very clearly that it would belong to Arya. Only Arya. Murmurs began to ripple across the table. I saw people exchanging glances, surprised. Madison sat frozen, gripping her napkin tightly. Mom, she started, her voice shaky. I didn't know. But Grandma turned to her, her gaze sharp. You didn't know, or you didn't ask. That question silenced her instantly. I sat there, barely able to process what was happening. Layer by layer, the truth was being uncovered right in front of everyone. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who had to defend myself. I wasn't the one struggling to prove I had been treated unfairly. Someone else was doing it for me, clearly, firmly, and without hesitation. Grandma leaned back slightly, her voice lowering. This is no longer about the car, she said. It's about a family where some people believe they have the right to decide for others, and call it love. No one spoke. No one argued. And in that moment, I realized everything was changing. Not just for me, but for this entire family. The tension in the room hadn't eased when Grandma slowly turned to Uncle Robert. Did you bring what I asked for? She said calmly, almost too calmly. My mother reacted instantly. Mom, this doesn't need to be blown out of proportion, but Grandma raised her hand, cutting her off. 3 weeks, she said evenly. 3 weeks you had to return the car, apologize, and fix this. Instead, you chose to turn it into something else. So now the truth will be told here. Uncle Robert stood up and pulled out a manila envelope from beneath the table. The way my mother stared at it, it was like it could destroy everything. Grandma opened the envelope and placed a stack of papers on the table under the gaze of everyone in the room. Read it, she said. Uncle Robert adjusted his glasses and looked at the first page. Vehicle registration. Registered owner Eleanor Mitchell. A ripple of murmurs spread across the table. My mother quickly cut in. That's just for convenience. Continue, Grandma interrupted, without even looking at her. He flipped to the next page, his voice slowing. As he read, Family Trust Disbursement Agreement. Amount $28,000. Given to Linda Reynolds for the purchase of a vehicle as a birthday gift for Arya Reynolds. My heart skipped. $28,000. This wasn't from my parents. It was from Grandma. Keep reading, she said. The vehicle will be registered under Eleanor Mitchell, but will serve as the sole property of Arya Reynolds. It may not be transferred, loaned, or used by any other family member without Arya's written consent. Every word landed like a hammer. The room went completely silent. There was no doubt anymore. My mother stood there, pale. That was just paperwork. I didn't think... You didn't think, Grandma repeated sharply. You signed a legal agreement. You wrote a letter promising you would never take that car from Arya. She pulled out another sheet. Read this too. Uncle Robert's voice softened as he read the handwritten lines. I understand that Arya has often felt overlooked in our family, and I want this gift to show her that she matters. I will never take this car away or allow anyone else to use it without her permission." My throat tightened. My own mother had written those words. Madison started crying, tears falling uncontrollably. "Mom, you told me Arya agreed." Her voice broke. But this time, no one defended my mother. There was no story left to hide behind, no way to twist this into generosity. The truth was laid out on the table, clear, cold, undeniable. I sat there, my hands clenched, my mind spinning. All those years of wondering if I was too sensitive, if I had misunderstood everything gone. And now the proof was right there in front of everyone. Grandma looked around the room, her gaze resting on each person. "This is not a misunderstanding," she said. "This is a violation. And worse, it's a betrayal." No one argued. No one spoke, because this time, the truth was undeniable. Once the documents were laid out, everything was essentially decided. There were no more arguments, no more room for excuses. Grandma didn't need to raise her voice or threaten anyone. The truth alone was enough. She stood up slowly but firmly, her gaze sweeping across the room, as if reminding everyone this wasn't over yet. "Now we resolve this," she said. No one spoke. No one dared to interrupt. The silence was so heavy, I could hear my own heartbeat. She turned to Madison first. "The keys," she said simply. No explanation, no softness. Madison froze for a moment, tears still on her face. I could see the conflict in her eyes between the life she was used to and the reality that had just been exposed. Derek lightly touched her arm, as if grounding her. Finally, Madison lowered her head, reached into her purse, and pulled out the car keys. My keychain, the one I had chosen, glinted under the lights. She walked toward me, each step heavy, like she was leaving behind who she used to be. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I looked at her hand, then took the keys. The cold metal in my palm made it real. It was finally mine again. But Grandma wasn't done. She turned to my mother. "Linda," she said, her tone sharper now. "You still owe something." My mother stood rigid, her hands clenched. I had never seen her like this. No control, no confidence, just discomfort, and something close to fear. "I already apologized," she said quickly. "No," Grandma replied. "You said words. I'm talking about a real apology." The entire room held its breath. This wasn't about the car anymore. It was about how my mother had treated me for years. My mother turned to me, her eyes briefly meeting mine, as if for the first time truly seeing me. "Arya, I'm sorry," she said, her voice lower this time. No excuses, no justification, no but, just an apology. Simple, imperfect, but more real than before. I looked at her for a moment. Part of me wanted more, an acknowledgement and understanding, but another part of me didn't need it anymore. I stood up. "I accept your apology," I said calmly. I saw a flicker of relief cross her face, but I continued. "From now on, anything involving me, my property, my decisions, you ask me directly." The room fell silent again. I looked straight at her. "I'm not the flexible one anymore. I'm someone who has a say." No one spoke, but I could feel it. Something had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. Grandma smiled slightly for the first time that night. "That's my Arya," she said. And in that moment, I felt something I had never truly felt in my family before: real recognition. I thought everything was over the moment I held my car keys again, but Grandma wasn't finished. She stood there in the middle of the room, surrounded by family, her expression calm but unwavering. "There's one more thing," she said. I immediately noticed my mother close her eyes briefly, as if she already knew what was coming. The tension returned, but this time it wasn't from shock, it was from anticipation. "The family trust," Grandma began, her voice steady and deliberate. "Up until now, I've allowed my children, Linda, Robert, and Patricia, to manage it. They made requests and I approved them." A few people nodded. That was how things had always worked. But she paused, then continued. "Starting today, that changes." The room went still. My mother reacted instantly. "Mom, what do you mean?" There was a hint of panic in her voice. Grandma looked directly at her. "I will work directly with each grandchild. No more going through parents." The words landed like a final judgment. Not loud, but heavy enough to shift everything. I could see it on everyone's faces, surprise, confusion, even relief. But the one most affected was my mother. "That's not how it works," my mother said quickly. "We've always represented the family," represented, Grandma cut in sharply, "or decided who was more deserving." No one answered. No one dared to. She continued, now addressing the entire room. "I have watched long enough. I have seen how some children are favored and how others are overlooked." My heart pounded as she spoke. This was no longer just about me. This was a truth the whole family had ignored for years. "You are all adults," she said. "You have the right to speak for yourselves. You don't need anyone to filter your needs." A few heads nodded again, more firmly this time. Not complete agreement, but no opposition either. Because everyone knew she was right. And more importantly, she had the authority to make that decision. I glanced at Madison. She looked back at me, and for the first time, her expression had changed. There was no confidence, no entitlement, just a quiet realization. Maybe for the first time she understood that her place in the family wasn't guaranteed. My mother said nothing more. She stood there silent, as if trying to hold on to whatever control she had left. But everyone could see it, everything had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. Grandma looked at me one more time, her expression softening. And in that moment, I understood this was never just about getting the car back. It was about reclaiming my voice, not just for me, but for anyone who had ever been overlooked. And for the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own family. The party ended earlier than expected, even though no one officially said it. People still cut the cake saying happy birthday, took a few photos, but the atmosphere had completely changed. The laughter felt forced, the eye contact, avoided conversations, scattered and thin. Everything made one thing clear. No one could pretend things were normal anymore. The truth had been spoken, and it couldn't be taken back. I stayed a little longer, standing alone in the parking lot, looking at my SUV. As if I were looking at a part of myself I thought I had lost. I reached out and touched the door handle, the feeling familiar, yet somehow new. Not because the car had changed, but because I had. I was no longer the person who stood quietly while others made decisions for me. And strangely, it didn't feel as frightening as I had imagined. It felt lighter, clearer, like I had just stepped out of a small, suffocating space I had been trapped in for years. Aunt Patricia was the first to come out after me. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle but steady. I nodded, even though I wasn't entirely sure what that meant yet. "I think. For the first time, I see things clearly," I said. She smiled and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Clarity sometimes comes late, but it's always worth it," she said. "And you did really well today." I didn't know how to respond. My throat tightened slightly, not from sadness, but from finally being understood. One by one, people left the restaurant. My dad shook my hand, awkward, unsure of what to say. Madison passed by, paused for a second, and looked at me. She didn't speak, just gave a small nod. A simple gesture, but for the first time it didn't carry the assumption that everything would go back to normal. My mother left without looking back. That used to hurt. But this time I felt nothing. No expectation. No waiting. Grandma was the last one to leave. "Drive safe," she said, like always. But before turning away, she looked at me a little longer. "Never be the flexible one again," she said. I smiled softly. "I promise." And this time, it wasn't a promise to please someone else. It was a promise to myself. I drove home alone, the windows down, the wind rushing and carrying a sense of freedom I hadn't realized I was missing. No one telling me what to do. No one deciding for me. Just me, the road ahead, and a silence. But this time, it wasn't loneliness. It was peace. 2 weeks after the party, everything fell into a strange silence. No one brought it up. No texts from Madison. No calls from my mom. Just one short message from my dad. "Hope you're okay." I replied with a simple emoji, and that was it. Part of me felt relieved. No more exhausting conversations. No more feeling like I had to explain myself. But another part of me knew this silence wasn't the end. It was just a pause before something else. Then, on a Tuesday evening, my phone lit up. "Mom." I let it ring 3 times before answering. Arya, her voice came through, careful, almost rehearsed. "I think we should talk." I leaned back in my chair, taking a quiet breath. "About what?" I asked. A brief pause. I don't want this to tear the family apart, she said. It was just a misunderstanding. Can we move past it? I didn't answer right away. The word misunderstanding felt so familiar and exhausting, as if everything that had happened could be erased with a few soft words. A misunderstanding, I repeated. You took my property, lied about it in front of everyone, and now it's a misunderstanding. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. I shouldn't have said it like that in front of everyone. And your grandmother didn't need to escalate it. I closed my eyes for a second. Not an apology, not accountability, just deflection. I'm willing to talk, I said, slowly. But not to pretend nothing happened. I thought that would be the end of it. But then she continued, her voice lower. Has your grandmother said anything to you about the trust? I paused. So this was the real reason. Not me, not our relationship. Control. No, I answered shortly. And if you want to know, you should ask her. There was a few seconds of silence. I could feel the discomfort, the uncertainty feelings I had always carried before. Arya, I just want to make sure things are fair, she said. I let out a quiet laugh. Fair, I said. You only started caring about fairness when you stopped being the one in control. I didn't wait for her response. When you want to talk about what actually happened, I'll be here, I said. Otherwise, this conversation doesn't need to continue. And this time, I was the one who ended the call. I set my phone down, a quiet stillness settling over me. It wasn't victory. It wasn't defeat. It was just clarity. I wasn't waiting for her to change anymore. I didn't need her to understand. I just needed to hold my boundaries. And for the first time, that was enough. About a month after the party, when things had somewhat settled, I received a message from Madison. It wasn't about the car, not about Grandma or the trust. Just a simple line. Can we get coffee? I want to talk. I stared at the screen for a while before replying. Part of me wanted to ignore it to keep the distance I had just worked so hard to build. But another part of me wanted to see if this time could be different. In the end, I said yes. We met at a small cafe near my apartment. Madison arrived early, sitting in the corner holding her cup like it was something to anchor herself. She looked different, less confident, less certain, like she was no longer standing on familiar ground. When I sat down, she looked at me slightly hesitant. Thanks for coming, she said. I nodded, not saying much. There was a brief silence. Not uncomfortable, but heavy with thought. Then Madison spoke first. I've been thinking a lot, she said. Her voice slower and more sincere than I had ever heard it. About everything. Not just the car. I didn't interrupt. I wanted to hear it all. I always thought things were normal, she continued. Mom decided things, and I just accepted it. I never stopped to ask how you felt. I looked at her, trying to read whether this was real. And now I asked. Madison lowered her gaze to her hands. Now, I realize I was wrong, she said. Not just about the car, but about getting used to being prioritized. To the point where I didn't notice someone else was being left behind. That caught me off guard. Not the content, but the honesty. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away, she continued. I just want you to know, I'm trying to change. I stayed quiet for a moment. The anger I once felt wasn't as sharp anymore. Instead, there was something unfamiliar, somewhere between doubt and hope. I don't need you to be perfect, I finally said. I just need you to ask, before making decisions that involve me. Madison nodded immediately, as if it was the simplest thing in the world, but I knew for us it wasn't. She reached across the table, hesitating for a second, before touching my hand. I'll try, she said. I didn't pull away, not because everything was fixed, but because for the first time it felt like we could start again, not as we were before, but as something new, not perfect, but real. If someone asked me how this story ends, I wouldn't say it's a perfect ending. There's no moment where the whole family hugs and cries together, no complete apologies from everyone, and definitely not a everything goes back to normal kind of ending. But maybe that's exactly what makes it better. Because normal was never fair to me in the first place. My life afterward didn't change much on the outside. I still work every day, still drive my SUV through familiar streets, still live in my small apartment with a simple routine. But inside, everything is different. I don't overthink whether I'm being recognized anymore. I don't wait for someone to understand me. And most importantly, I no longer shrink myself to fit other people's expectations. My mother is still the same, at least on the surface. Our conversations are shorter, more careful. She no longer makes decisions for me, but she hasn't fully changed the way she sees things either, and I've accepted that. Not because I think it's okay, but because I understand not everyone is ready to change, even when they're wrong. Madison is different. Not dramatically, but in small ways. She asks before she asks for help, she listens more. And sometimes, she pauses before speaking like she's thinking about whether something is fair. To others, that might seem normal. But for us, it's progress. And Grandma, she's still the same. Quiet, observant, not overly involved. But I know that if anything happens, she'll be there not to speak for me, but to make sure I get to speak. But the most important thing isn't how they changed. It's how I did. I'm no longer the flexible one. I'm no longer the person who stays silent when treated unfairly. I don't need to be aggressive or confrontational. I just need to know what I deserve and refuse anything less. And maybe that's the biggest lesson of all. No one can take your value away unless you let them. After everything that happened, I realized something I had never truly considered before. My life wasn't restarting from zero. It was restarting from my true self. Not a smaller version of who I was, not someone constantly adjusting to fit others. Just me with everything I have, everything I want, and everything I deserve. In the weeks that followed, I started changing small things. I said no more often, not with anger, but with clarity. I stopped feeling guilty for turning down things that made me uncomfortable. And surprisingly, the world didn't fall apart. No one walked away. No disaster happened. Things just became more real. I also began reevaluating my relationships, not just within my family, but with friends, work, and the people I interact with daily. I realized that before I often tried too hard to please others, not because they demanded it, but because I had been conditioned to do so. Now I chose differently. I chose balance. I chose to listen to myself first. One morning, sitting in my car, before heading to work, I had a quiet realization. I no longer felt the need to prove anything. Not that I was good enough. Not that I was capable. Not that I deserved anything. I just existed. And that was enough. Grandma still calls me every week. Our conversations are just as calm as before, but now there's something new, an unspoken respect. One time she asked me, "Do you feel things have changed?" I smiled. Yes, I said, but not because they changed. Because I changed what I accept. She didn't say anything else, just nodded slightly, as if that was exactly the answer she was hoping for. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe my family will continue to change, maybe they won't. Maybe there will be more conflicts, more challenges. But this time I'm not afraid, because I know that no matter what happens, I won't go back to who I used to be. And maybe that's the real victory. Not getting the car back, not the apology, but finally choosing to stand on my own side. Have you ever had your family make decisions for you without asking? Would you stay silent to keep the peace, or speak up to protect yourself? Comment, "I choose," and share your story. And if you believe everyone deserves respect, don't forget to like and follow for more stories like this. Sometimes I wonder, what if that day at the party I had stayed silent, like I always did? If I had just nodded, smiled, and let my mother tell her version of the story without saying a word, maybe everything would have been peaceful. No awkward stares, no truth exposed, no cracks in the family. Everything would have looked normal on the surface. But what would I have lost? Maybe I would have lost the car. But more importantly, I would have lost my voice. I would have lost the one chance to say, "No, this isn't okay." And from that moment on, things might have only gotten worse. Because once you accept being treated unfairly, people start to assume you always will. The truth is, speaking up doesn't always make things better right away. It can make things uncomfortable. It can change relationships. It can make you feel alone for a while. But staying silent will always cost you yourself. I'm not saying everyone has to do what I did. Everyone has different circumstances, different limits. But one thing I know for sure, you deserve to be respected. And if you don't protect that, no one else will do it for you forever. This story was never really about a car. It was about boundaries, about value, about choosing where you stand when things become unfair. And maybe the real question isn't who was right or wrong, But what kind of person will you choose to be? If you were Arya, would you speak up at that dinner, or stay silent to keep the peace? Comment silent or speak up, and choose your side. And if you've ever been treated unfairly by your own family, share your story. Someone out there might need to hear it. Don't forget to like and follow for more real stories like this. There's something no one really talks about after situations like this. Favoritism in families rarely starts with bad intentions. It begins with small choices repeated over time. One moment of preference, one, you're more understanding, one, let your sister go first, and slowly it becomes an invisible system that no one questions anymore. I don't think my mother wakes up every day and decides to treat me unfairly. I think she genuinely believes what she does makes sense. But the problem is, when you're never the one asked to step aside, you never learn what it feels like to always be the one who does. And that's how unfairness survives for so long, not because it's extreme, but because it's familiar. The scariest part isn't being treated unfairly. It's when you start to believe that it's normal, that you matter less, that your needs can wait, that your voice isn't necessary. I used to believe that. I used to think being adaptable was a strength, that staying quiet was how you kept peace. But I didn't realize that every time I chose silence, I was teaching people how to treat me. It's not that they didn't know. It's that they didn't have to change. Only when I changed, when I started saying no, when I stopped accepting everything, did things around me begin to shift. Not instantly, not perfectly, but enough to make a difference. And that's something no one tells you. Boundaries aren't meant to change other people. They're meant to protect you. People might not like it. They might resist, react, or even try to pull you back into who you used to be. But that doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means they were used to a version of you that was easier to control. I don't want to be that version anymore. And if you're listening to this story, maybe you've been there too. The one who always gives in, always understands, always keeps things together. But remember, being okay doesn't mean accepting everything. And being understanding doesn't mean abandoning yourself. If you followed this story all the way here, then you probably realize something. The hardest part isn't facing other people. It's facing yourself. Facing the question, will I keep tolerating this? Or will I start changing? Because the truth is, no one wakes up one day suddenly strong. You just reach a point where you can't take it anymore. And you have to choose. I chose to speak up. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because I was more afraid of staying silent. And if you're in a similar situation, being overlooked, dismissed, or decided for, then maybe you're standing at that same crossroads. You don't have to change everything overnight. You don't have to confront everyone. But you do need to start with one small thing. Don't stay silent when you know it's not right. Because the moment you speak up even once, things will never go back to how they were. And that's not a bad thing. That's a beginning. Have you ever stayed silent when you should have spoken up? And if you could go back, would you choose differently? Comment, I stayed silent, or I would speak up, and share your choice. If this story made you think, don't forget to like, share, and follow, because you're not the only one going through this.